to our main attraction, the three-ring circus in the big top tent. We hope our clowns will entertain you before making you the main event.
Clowns, a modern-day bad omen. The once beloved fools meant to entertain audiences and make children smile are one of the modern era's favorite characters of horror and evil. From comic book villains, video game antagonists, monstrous creatures in books, to even real-life harbingers of death and misery, the once humble and harmless clown is now seen as an embodiment of the uncanny and unsafe. And that goes for really all branches of its family tree. Jesters and clowns have a uniquely odd and dark history behind them, and have earned their reputation. But I guess that makes sense, as carnivals themselves have always held their own sense of darkness to them. The festive shows designed to entertain families are actually quite bleak when you take a closer look at them. Originating, and in many places still existing, as festive celebrations, the depiction that comes to mind, however, when you hear the term carnival, is more than likely the traveling roadshow, going from town to town with giant tents, filled with performances of dangerous acrobatics, taming wild and dangerous animals, freak shows unveiling deformed and crippled people for the entertainment and shock of the masses, and of course shows introducing our oh-so-familiar friends, the clowns. So using these sorts of festivals as a backdrop in horror is really no surprise, because taking something already steeped in the shocking and uncanny and twisting it into a horrifying depiction of dread, violence, and terror is no hard task at all.
Spooky Sam, welcoming you along on Spooky Sam's Ghost Tour. On your left, you'll see the tomb of Ludwig von Tokentaker, where the legend of Greeley Valley all got started. You all know the legend of Greeley Valley.
Back in 1998, Carnevil would be released, capitalizing on the exact kind of horror that you would expect someone to mold out of a twisted carnival, full of killer clowns, morbid creatures, and the kind of blood and gore that you would expect out of the creators of Mortal Kombat. Carnevil would hit the scene and quickly become a cult classic, stealing quarters and giving some competition to other light gun shooters of its era, like House of the Dead and Area 51. But here, we would get a break from the typical zombies and aliens by instead treating us to a more schlocky B-movie based experience, playing on the idea of urban legends, demons, and the occult to backdrop its quarter-eating gameplay. Here we are a kid out with his friends to see if the urban legend of the Coin Master is real, only to be trapped within the titular Carnevil and be tasked with surviving the hordes of demons sent our way. And in our quest to defeat the ringleader and get to safety, we'll be routinely heckled by the Jester, before starting each level, and ending each of those levels with an increasingly grotesque and disgusting boss to face off with. And once we reach the end and take down the ringleader, we get to escape with our lives, triumphant over the demonic forces that trapped us in the start. To this day, Carnevil is a great game, and it's an absolute blast to experience if you can get it up and running. But aside from that, there really isn't much else to say about the game. It was a fun little arcade game to play while you were waiting for your movie to start at the theater. But like most other arcade cabinets, as time went on and arcades were phased out, it would drift into obscurity. But that's not to say that it didn't leave at least a little bit of a haunting feeling, lingering in those who played it.
Beware, coward.
Arcades are no stranger to urban legends and conspiracy. A simple Google search will gift you plenty of stories of varying legitimacy. One of the more well-known of these, however, would be the Curse of Evil Otto. Back in 1980, a game known as Berserk would be released, and it would quickly become a hit. Berserk was an isometric shooter, at least a very early incarnation of one, where you get to run around these crudely crafted little rooms fighting robots. Though the game's defining feature was actually its use of sound.
Intruder alert, intruder alert.
It went beyond the typical boops and beeps of the time, and included voice synthesis, an at the time new technology. The voice itself would be coming from the game's main villain, Evil Otto, something that looks just like an unassuming smiley face that would bounce on the screen. Typically, urban legends don't form around games as simple and non-threatening as this. But a string of deaths would bring a legend around Berserk that's kept it remembered for decades past its shelf life. Two of these deaths happened right after the player had beat the high score on the cabinet. The two most infamous being a heart attack that occurred minutes after the player beat the game, and another being a brutal stabbing. Now, these deaths have since been contested, and obviously a digitized smiley face isn't responsible for any real deaths in the world. But the truth never gets in the way of a good horror story. Another arcade urban legend that would be famous is the Tale of Polybius, a game that may or may not have ever existed. Supposedly appearing in random arcades around the early 80s, this mysterious game cabinet was rumored to have caused nausea, seizures, hallucinations, nightmares, and even suicidal tendencies in players. And where it all gets even more twisted is that the eyewitnesses who claim the cabinet's legitimacy would also claim it was upkept by people described as Men in Black, the well-known government cryptid, the creatures who always seem close by anytime something paranormal is at play.
A couple of really strange looking men that were here, and they kind of freaked everybody out, and they were asking questions about you. And of course, now I'm getting a little bit nervous, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, he goes, I don't know how to describe them except for extremely odd looking. They were the exact same height, they were wearing the exact same clothes, and they had the exact same faces, like they were twins. And he said they were wearing black suits, black trench coats, they were wearing like the old-fashioned fedora hats. They had extremely, extremely pale skin.
But just as quickly as it showed up, it would disappear. And outside of its references in shows like The Simpsons, it would soon only exist as a scary story told on online message boards. Yet another arcade conspiracy to entertain and terrify those who hear it. But I guess that begs the question now, doesn't it? What does all this have to do with Carnevil? I mentioned this over in the video game urban legends threads, and I think it's time to make an entire thread on this. Carnevil was an arcade light gun shooter that came out on October 31st, 1998, and was both published and developed by Midway Games. It was a bestseller and even outsold Mortal Kombat 4 that year, yet despite its popularity, it never had a sequel, nor has it been released on a home console or PC. The game is noted for its extreme graphic violence and surrealistic dark comedy, but there's a much darker secret and I've been trying to figure it out. If you're expecting some low-effort creepypasta, then look elsewhere. This is real, and I know what I'm talking about. Carnevil was a game developed mainly by a right-wing Celtic pagan folk cult, and was meant to be part of a series in a complex set of rituals for Samhain, the Celtic New Year that has been commonly misidentified with Halloween by clueless redneck Protestants. The game itself was the concept of Jack E. Hagar, a Midway employee at the time who had no real connections to the cult and wanted to just make a spooky Halloween horror game. For my former brethren working for Midway at the time, he's what's known as a useful pawn. The game's Radar article, published for the game's 20th anniversary in 2018, is mostly just fluff, but there's useful tidbits of information in it. Namely, it confirms the existence of the lost console port and its bizarre development that he was largely kept out of, and that Midway higher-ups were giving them some trouble. The real mystery is the tunnel, a level that was cut completely, and the only thing remaining in the game's code is a song for the area of the game that was found by emulators looking into the code for the cut content. A cult ritual hidden underneath a humble little arcade game, even providing us a link to further explore their claim. Sure, let's bite. OP goes on to tell about how this sounds like crappy elevator music that you would hear in an old porno, before revealing that it was part of some cut content for the game. An apparent tunnel of love level that was cut out because they wanted to avoid censorship and backlash. Midway's higher-ups made sure the tunnel was cut because it was too offensive and they did not want arcade owners to ban the game. If you played Carnevil, then you would know the Tunnel of Love would be really fucked up to be too offensive for the most twisted arcade game ever made. There's a bunch of other weird shit in the game's code, including placeholder images of Sailor Jupiter and a shopped image of Jeffrey Dahmer holding a severed head of the Midway executive that gave the dev issues meant as a joke. The devs who are part of this cult are weebs, and old school 90s weebs were known as otaku, and liked violent, edgy shit and guro hentai. Guro-obsessed weebs in old school anime? Yeah, that definitely reeks of the 90s nerd scene. But let's try to take a step back and get a better idea of just what's actually being talked about here. OP claims the cult is based around Celtic pagan beliefs, and directly references rituals for Samhain. So why don't we start there? Now, for those of you who don't know, Samhain is a holiday that would become the inspiration of what we now know as Halloween, and is actually the origin point where the tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns originated from. In essence, it was a festive day where the Celts would offer sacrifices to their gods in order to protect themselves not just during the coming winter, but also to counteract the actions of said gods, because it was believed that during Samhain, they would be visible to mortals, and these supernatural beings liked to play tricks on their worshippers. And while this might sound strange today, let's clear something up. Despite the modern conception of paganism being that it's for cat ladies who like to sing Kumbaya and shove stones up their ass, much of the older world pagan beliefs were much more brutal and demanded sacrifice and rituals to appease the vengeful gods that were worshipped during those times. And these beliefs were followed all across Europe and spread across different countries with different pantheons and cultures. Some examples being the obvious Roman pantheon, but also the Nordic pantheon. Well, the game's credits even mention Princess Serenity in the credits under Special Thanks. And this cult I was in did have members in multiple states and even a small group in Ontario. The leader in the Canadian branch was a stereotypical otaku who obsessed with Sailor Mercury and was on a Dateline report, but a lot of his more overt, neat otaku behavior was meant as an act to fool people into thinking he was an incompetent basement dweller instead of the Canadian equivalent of Lord Summersile. He was not the leader at the time the interview took place in the 90s though, and I'm not sure if he had any connections to Carnevil, or more specifically the Lost Console version that was an entirely different kind of game instead of a mere arcade port.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, Todd.
Come on in.
Great, thanks a lot.
So you're the ultimate fan.
I don't know if I really want to flatter myself that way, but I am definitely obsessed with Ami Mizuno, Sailor Mercury.
You guessed it. Greg Taylor is also a big fan of anime. More specifically, this 20-year-old university student's love is... She's the lead character's sidekick in the popular children's cartoon called Sailor Moon.
A weeb making an obsessive sight in service to his waifu is nothing new. There's even whole movies dedicated to things like this, like Perfect Blue. But to think of someone like this actually being the leader of some cult, that's a new one. But, to be fair, while it might sound absurd to think about, it would actually make more sense than you think. Someone who could become this obsessed and devout to a teenage anime girl from a show made for little kids could actually be an integral member to a pagan cult. Because both of these would require an obsessive personality and stalkerish tendencies. OP goes on to give more information, alleging more Guro anime and pagan footage was hidden within the game. They link to the Cutting Room Floor wiki to try and back up their claims, and it's here where we can actually see the Sailor Moon reference, as well as the hidden Jeffrey Dahmer photo. And while it is creepy, there still isn't much proof to a cult actually being here. Another user would actually try to pry at OP, asking about how he got information regarding these movie clips mentioned, and OP would actually respond. A close friend of mine worked at Midway on the dev team back then. We actually were both roommates in Iowa at the time, and he had 2 places of residence, an apartment near Chicago he rented in his name, and the ranch in Iowa that the group owned that I lived on. Midway Games had their main HQ in Chicago, and they had several smaller offices in Illinois and Iowa for their arcade division. I know that sounds like one of those "my dad works at Nintendo" excuses, but it's true. I met a lot of strange and varied people in my old pagan community. As you drift further away from the Wicca and New Age garbage, a lot of people overlap or keep in touch with one another more closely. Like I said, I was actually part of a Celtic pagan folk cult mainly devoted to the worship of Lu, Akeni, the Dagda, as well as the Morrigan. A lot of creepy and disturbing rituals are associated with the Morrigan. She's nothing like the Wiccan goth girls and New Agers portray her as. If you read Celtic myth, you'd know that. Well, it does sound like one of those "my dad works at Nintendo" excuses. But we did get some interesting bits of information here. OP mentions Midway having offices in both Chicago and Iowa. And he's correct about Chicago. Obviously, it's public record, and Midway was famous for being a Chicago-based video game company. But it's when we look through the other listed locations where we find that Iowa doesn't seem to pop up. There's plenty of other locations, including various studios Midway owned and founded, including those across the other US states and even some abroad, but none being in Iowa. Googling to find it also leads to fruitless results. Though, interestingly enough, there does appear to be a theme park based in Iowa that does share the name Midway. And given Carnivil is a game about a haunted theme park, it is an interesting little note to make. But outside of maybe trying to loosely connect this theme park with the gaming company, it otherwise just seems to be a bit of a crack in the story here. But that's not the only thing OP brought in to connect here. He also gave us useful information in regards to the name he drops of the gods that his chapter of the cult worshipped, and specifically the main goddess across the board here, and that would be the Morrigan. In Celtic mythology, the Morrigan is a formidable goddess of war, fate, sovereignty, and death. She's often portrayed as a shapeshifter who likes to take the form of either a crow or a raven and fly over battlefields. One of her most prominent aspects is that she wields prophetic power over the destiny of warriors and kingdoms, foretelling doom and deciding who will live or die. Her mythic presence is deeply intertwined with the land itself and the cycles of life, death, and transformation. Some of the darker practices and associations around the Morrigan reflect her role as a harbinger of death and destruction. She's said to wash the bloodied armor of those destined to die, an ominous ritual that signifies the sealing of their fate. The weebs and D&D nerds were simply two of the demographics the cult recruited from. They also did recruitment in goth and metal circles as well, preying on outcasts and people from broken homes and dysfunctional families. The longer you were in the cult, the more that was discouraged, and if you wanted to advance ranks, you had to get deeper into the occult, pagan, and right-wing stuff. I left the cult in 2002, a few months after 9/11. Shit was getting serious and I bugged out of there. No longer live in Iowa and I don't keep in touch with anyone from the cult. The game devs who were working on the console version of Carnevil were a third-party group contracted by Midway as opposed to the actual employee devs who did the arcade version. Only two of these guys were cultists, my old roommate and another person. They were in the lower ranks. And I actually met Greg, the Canadian weeb who loved Sailor Mercury, around 1999 or 2000 when the Ontario branch met up with the other Midwestern sets of the cult. He'd lost weight and become less interested in anime and more fixated on worship and rituals so he could gain rank. I'm not sure if the cult is still active or if they've rebranded. After Columbine and 9/11, the cult intentionally kept an even lower profile, and there was a lot of fears of law enforcement getting involved since a lot of guys stockpiled weapons and some of them sold drugs too, and a lot of cultists did all sorts of criminal activities. Some of the advanced rituals would also be considered felonies, and a lot of people started panicking and jumping ship in the early 2000s. Some of the oldest members of the cult originally belonged to white gangs in the wider Chicago area, like the Jousters, Gaylords, Stoned Freaks, and Uptown Rebels. All four gangs mentioned were real Chicago gangs, and each can easily be Google searched and verified. The Jousters and Gaylords were specifically allied too, adding some legitimacy to the claim here. But outside of the mention of them containing some of the original members of this supposed cult, not much information is ever given regarding their specific connections. Now, before we move forward, I think we should try to take a step back and reflect on just what's been revealed here. To summarize, the cult was built off of old Chicago gangs by members who dabbled in the occult, and from these roots began this specific pagan cult focusing on Celtic beliefs. They would target D&D nerds and otakus in order to find people who were interested in the metaphysical and arcane, specifically guiding them away from the more palatable and common stuff such as Wicca and neo-pagan beliefs, and push them more in the direction of the old, traditional, violent beliefs of the Celtic pantheon. They then began to radicalize their followers and use them to infiltrate media industries, in particular the video game industry, and even though they tried to use Carnevil as an entry point, their real goal was to use this supposed cancelled console port of the game to push their ritual even further. The deeper this thread goes, the more insane it's beginning to sound. From a plausible situation of some weird pagans just wanting to embed some propaganda, to this dark ritualistic recruitment and infiltration. But I guess that's where the truth comes in here.
Classroom, or in old language a couple thousand years ago, disciples. those who are trying to prepare themselves for entry into the evolutionary level above human, synonymous with the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. We're going to talk to you about the most urgent thing that is on our mind, and what we suspect is the most urgent thing on the minds of those who will connect with us.
Cults are like this, and they do the unbelievable. If we just look at figures like Charles Manson, or even Jim Jones, they use the hippie-free love movement, or in Jim Jones's sense, the socialist-tinged Christianity of the time, to bait people in before convincing them of their more hardcore beliefs. It honestly isn't all that strange when you compare what's being alleged here with what we've already seen in the past. And for reference, the deities listed are all real figures from Celtic paganism. So, while all this is extremely strange, especially considering it's all in reference and connected to what is just an obscure arcade game from the late 90s, it again is a lot more plausible than you may think. Just look at cults from the past, and you'll see how obvious it is that they like to use media in subversive ways. If we take a look at the Children of God, they famously created shows and cartoons based around their beliefs to brainwash children and reinforce their beliefs onto their followers. And while most of this did stay within the realms of the Children of God, in countries like the Philippines, some of these specials did get played on live television. And even across the world, in Japan, you had the Aum Shinrikyo. Their leader would often go on talk shows, create yoga DVDs, as well as, most famously, make an entire anime about their beliefs, all in an attempt to brainwash and recruit new individuals to their ranks. Though the main difference here is that with almost all of these other cults, they were very clear about what they believed and what their intentions were. And given the secrecy of this particular cult, it is a bit hard to see the point of trying to propagandize using some weird arcade game. But as the thread goes on, OP begins to give us details about their beliefs. They worshipped Celtic gods and goddesses. Rituals often involved sex acts, both gay and straight, lighting candles, bloodletting and self-harm, and plant sacrifices. More advanced rituals for certain holidays or special events involved sacrificing live animals, namely farm animals like chickens, pigs, sheep, and at one point, a calf. There were rumors of some of the other sets in Michigan and Kentucky who went and did human sacrifices of kidnapped people, such as potential informants or rival gang/cult members, but I honestly doubt those claims. Animal sacrifices were real, and I saw them firsthand, took part in some of the self-harm and candlelighting rituals. Initiation rituals were similar to gang initiations, and included beatings followed by group sex, often a sadomasochistic bent. Still have nightmares from my initiation into the group. Having a bunch of people beat the shit out of you, then literally fuck you in the ass back to back is not fun to say the least. But I wanted to prove myself as worthy of the cult. I welcomed it at the time, and signed off on those acts more or less, but I regret it deeply now. I did have a car, and I was a quartermaster and steward. My job was to acquire weapons, food, fuel, ammunition, and other basic supplies for our stockpile in Iowa. OP then goes on to talk about how initiates would watch Guro, S&M films, and would do LARPing in order to desensitize them to violence. Going on to say that Carnevil itself was part of this, as well as an attempt for the cult to get their foot into the gaming industry. And what better vessel to desensitize the youth with than the video games focused around violence and death? And what better company to be the harbinger of such a task than Midway, the original publishers of Mortal Kombat, the game responsible for the ESRB even becoming an organization to begin with. As the thread goes on, the OP goes on to speculate on the cult and its activities after he had left. musing about how even if they were to disband, many figures would more than likely maintain their beliefs and continue on with their intentions. I wouldn't be surprised if the cult was organized as some Black Ops recruitment farm by some bigger organization. Not sure if they were being used by Deep State or some other larger cult unrelated to any of it, but I always thought it was unusual for such a fringe cult to have so many sets in multiple states, and even one in Canada, but they were all small in number. The Iowa set I was in ran at about 20 or so deep at most. The Kentucky set was about 10 or 12 people at its peak, and there were groups in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia whose sets were in the single digits. The biggest group was the Mother chapter in Chicago area at around 50 people or so, and the Michigan guys were around anywhere from 15 to 25 people. Maybe some of the more promising cultists were let into a bigger organization or something. We watched a lot of zombie movies and used the zombie apocalypse as a code for training for shift scenario. This was in the 90s and very early 2000s, before The Walking Dead or even 28 Days Later. When zombies went full mainstream fad and all of a sudden the CDC and FEMA were using zombie apocalypse imagery to raise awareness for the emergency preparedness and disaster prep. It could have been a test run for predictive programming, or maybe it was just coincidence. As fun as this little confession was to read, this is where OP makes the mistake of showing their full hand. And the idea that this cult could have been real and there was something actually here was accidentally revealed to be nothing more than a failed hoax. One that had the chance to be believed until it went full tinfoil. I was following you until you said you got gangbanged by 3 guys and then kept the story going. Reads as a lame parody. Good joke though. Some gullible idiot is bound to believe you. As much as I would love for the idea of some creepy Celtic cult to be hiding within the gaming industry, like they're the Silver Shamrock Company from Halloween 3, the reality is that it's all just bullshit. As the thread continues, OP begins to try and relate things back to Greg without ever giving any substantial evidence that this Sailor Moon fanboy is actually part of the cult, as well as he tries to relate things to Freemasonry and then delve into some satanic panic style stuff. And look, I love this kind of shit. I love the idea of this stuff, and for some of it, there is a lot of legitimacy to these ideas. But as far as the story we're reading here in this thread goes, well, I think it's safe to say that the old adage was proven true once again. That being that OP never delivers. Though this shouldn't be a surprise, the previously mentioned Polybius was never found and outed to be a hoax as well, and, well, Evil Otto. If you think that smiley face committed those murders, then I think I know a nice institution you should go to. But all jokes aside, that's not to say that there aren't pieces of media created by actual cults in order to promote their beliefs. You have big examples like Scientology's founder L. Ron Hubbard and the famous novel series that he created, multiple of them actually, as well as the previously mentioned Children of God or Aum Shinrikyo. They disseminated media amongst themselves designed to promote their beliefs not only among themselves, but also to the outside world and to attract new people to the cults that they belong to. The scariest part about this whole Carnevil cult and this whole thread is not that it's terrible how it ends and ruins what could have been a really fun little hoax, but it's the fact that these things do actually happen. There are psychos out there that create things specifically to propagandize to you. And while, that's called propaganda, it's a lot more nefarious when it goes beyond the realms of political slop and directly into the subconscious, the metaphysical, and the religious. Again, there's plenty of cults to read about. And there's plenty of reason to take these things as seriously as they need to be. But with that being said, as for Carnevil here, it's just another fun little hoax to talk about on the internet. and a great way to give a forgotten game a new lease on life. Or to put it in the words of OP, let it live as a low-effort creepypasta. But hey, I could be wrong. You never know. Maybe the reality is, there is an evil cult hidden in the old dusty cabinet of an arcade game. Now, before you go, there is one last thing I'd like to show you. This is my wall of shame. The list of names who donate to me at least once a month to make sure that I don't starve to death, and hey, we love them for it. And that's why their names are right here. So, if you enjoy the channel and want to show your support, you could give me money through Patreon or a one-time donation through Ko-fi. All jokes aside, I can't thank you all enough for the support that you give, and I'm glad you guys are here enjoying the content. I've got a lot more coming your way. This is video 2 for the Halloween October celebration, whatever the fuck you want to call it. I'm just enjoying the season and making some extra silly, spooky content for you all, and yeah, I hope you enjoy it. I'm kind of using it as an excuse to experiment, so I don't know. I hope you guys like this. I know I haven't really touched X threads yet, and it's been something I've been considering, you know, doing some, I guess, investigative, analytical content, storytelling, whatever you want to call it stuff. So if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, go ahead and let me know in the comments. But with that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you all in the next video.